My name is Angie, and this is the story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm our sister, Cindy. We started this podcast with one name, Stella Smith, our great-grandmother, a woman who gave up 2 daughters, disappeared from history, and left behind almost nothing.
No photos, no grave, no explanation, just a blank space where a person should have been.
Until a DNA test changed everything. Turns out, Stella Smith wasn't even her real name.
Her name was Estrella Suarez. She came to America from Spain as a child. She married twice, left 2 families, and somehow managed to vanish not once, but twice from history.
In season 1, we found Estrella's beginnings in America. We found family we didn't know existed. We sat across a table from cousins who'd been looking for the same woman we had from the other direction. And we thought we were closing a chapter.
We were wrong.
Because season 2 is where things get even more complicated and even more personal. New relatives surface, new documents turn up, and some of the answers we finally found led to questions we'd never thought to ask.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when the past refuses to stay buried.
In season 1, we presented 25 years of research on our great-grandmother and our story of discovery of her and a lot of our family story. And in season 2, all the information we're sharing has been as we are discovering it, basically beginning in February of 2026 to date. This has been real-time updates. And we're hearing that people want to know what we're researching and they love to help.
As we're moving into this next section, we're going to start doing what we call hanging threads. And we're just going to kind of share, this is where we are. This is an unknown fact, or this is something that's tickled our interest and something we want to learn more about. We're just going to share it with you and just talk it out loud. We love to talk it out loud and see if we can generate some new ideas of how to research or where to go. See if anyone else who knows how to do researching as well wants to jump in and see where it leads us. And so it's just as raw as it could be to say, here is exactly where we are, what we're researching, and what we're doing. And so we're going to kind of choose one thing each time that we're researching, give the background information that relates to it, kind of what we know and what we want to know. And then we'll let you know what our questions are and what information we hope to find, where we're looking, where we want to go with this.
Yeah. So today we're looking at the Spain connection. Well, Rosa and Estrella were all born in Spain.
That's correct. On the one hand, very limited information on exactly where in Spain. But on the other hand, we do have some good information that has come relatively recently and we've been rereading it. So with regards to Estrella and Rosa, I've never been able to find any documentation on their manifest coming over because that does share a decent amount of information on it, but I've not been able to find that. And I don't have any birth information for them. Rosa does declare what her hometown is on a couple of censuses, but really there's not a whole lot of information, even less relating to Estrella. And also, neither of those two became naturalized citizens. Well, I should say, in true form. Technically, Estrella assumed the identity of someone, more than one someone who was a naturalized citizen. And so who wasn't always a citizen. And so because of that, she did receive Social Security benefits and other things, but she didn't get that legally and she didn't go through the normal channels. And so you don't have the paperwork that comes with it. So typically when someone is naturalized, it's a pretty detailed document that kind of outlines who the family is and hometown. And you have to actually state on there when you arrived, the exact day and the ship that you came on. So there's good information. But again, neither of those two women went through that process. And so we just don't have as much for them. But we do have that information for Manuel. And actually, Susan resent it to me again just recently. I was looking at it again. We've talked in some other episodes, but this re-looking at old information has just been so good because either we missed things before or we just know things differently or understand them differently or think about them in different ways. And so just reviewing all those documents again has been helpful to us in looking into this. And so the other thing that Susan sent, you may remember that Susan is the wife of Phil and Phil is the son of Nina. And Susan and actually Susan's mother have done a lot of genealogy research on both sides of the family, on Susan's birth family as well as on Manuel's. She sent me a picture of a massive trunk, a big trunk. You could fit a body or two in there. And she said she has 2 of these filled with all of her mom's research. Lots and lots of stuff. She's also been going through this process of re-looking at those items and information that she already knew about and already has read. But again, fresh eyes, fresh things. And so she sent me a letter, a handwritten letter, which of course, those are always fun. anyways, but sent me this handwritten letter that was from, I think it was a friend of the family who was visiting Spain.
A friend, yes.
Yeah. Wrote this letter saying, hey, I went to your hometown. I went to the town that you were from in Spain and visited, and here are some of the things. And you could tell by the information that was shared. I'll read a portion of it, but you can tell that she had been given information about the family to know questions to ask and that kind of thing. She was giving just that information. So this letter was written in 1996. Actually, it was postmarked May 6th of 1996. And again, it was written to Nina from this friend. I'm not going to say the name of the friend because that doesn't necessarily pertain. But anyways, who shared the information. And so it says, Dear Nina, I just got home 2 weeks ago from a trip to Spain. Had a great time. I went to the town where your cousins lived. No one knew where the family lived. It seems as if they've all moved away. Of course, you know that Oscar and Teresa died. They said something about Oscar had a girl that had something wrong with her arm or her hands. I talked with a lady by the name of Maria Lola. She couldn't tell me anything. I'm sending you her address in case you would like to get in touch with her. Of course, it would need to be in Spanish because she doesn't write or talk in English. I pray that this letter finds you in good health. I'm doing great. Love, her friend's name. And then it has the address. Now, interesting here. Here's the name of the person, the Maria Lola Fernandez. Now, we haven't talked about all of the branches of the tree. And I mean, we talked that I did this huge mapping thing, but here's the point. Fernandez is one of the key names, one of kind of 4 key names in the family line. And so as soon as I see her Fernandez, I know there's definitely somebody in the right thing. So Maria Lola Fernandez. And then the address is Santiago del Monte, La Camp, Asturias. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Aviles, Spain. So Asturias, and then it's Aviles, and then Spain. Now, here are some interesting things. I think I've told you before that, and this is true in the family where we're researching, but it's also true in general of people who are researching immigrant families. There's almost always a ceiling or a wall right at the generation of where families came over. So in other words, you can find through our local records, through our records of this country, you can find things from when they arrived and all the things happen here. But there's a lag because records from where they were at before are stored obviously in another country and they're not always accessible. And sometimes families brought the information over and shared it, but a lot of times families didn't. In this case, that's how it is. Manuel and Rosa, when they passed away in their effects, they did not have documents that related to life before they immigrated here. And so when you build a tree, that can be a little bit tricky. So when I did this huge, massive DNA mapping project, I went through the different Spanish DNAs, started building a tree for each one. So I would get this random DNA match that says, hey, you're matched to, some people put fake names. So it said big Colts fan 21, but I have to try to figure out who she is and build the tree up. And you just you build the tree up, you build the tree up, and you see where they converge. And that's how I have this massive project. Well, anyways, in all that whole process, the name of Manuel's parents, mother, the last name was written Lacampa, Lacampa. Now, I'm not an expert on this, so I might butcher some of these details, but here was what was interesting to me that I could never quite figure out. A lot of families move from Spain to Cuba and then from Cuba to the U.S. And you could almost always tell that in researching because they write the last name differently. They would almost always put De La and then Fernandez or De La, whatever. So they would have that, instead of saying Fernandez Suarez, it would be of the. So when you're looking at names on documents, you can always see. So it was just weird to me that this woman that, as far as I knew, was born and died in Spain, had this name Lacampa. It just seemed weird. So my AI friend, which this is not to be taken as fact, but just the observation they made when I showed them this address, my AI friend said, isn't that interesting that Lacampa is the same, like the address is the same thing as the woman's last name, and was speculating that maybe the original record where I got her last name, that it wasn't really her last name. It was more of an address like Maria of Lacampa or whatever that might be. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know for sure on that. But it was just interesting. So when I read this, there were like so many familiar pieces. Oh, I recognize Fernandez. Oh, I recognize. But the most important piece of all that is we know this tight region in which Manuel is from, Santiago del Monte. Now, what's good about that is my understanding that in Spain, if you know the actual province, you know the actual city, community, you can go and get the Spanish church records, the Catholic church records baptism and those kind of things. And those records are actually very detailed and very good, and they're relatively searchable, but you can't just put in Manuel Suarez and see where does he pop up. You have to know the exact community that they live in. So one of the things I'd like to be able to do is to get into it. I had a person in Spain help me research before, maybe go back to her again and see if she would be able to look up information in this specific province and see what pops up on there to see if that can help track it down where Estrella lives. The problem is if Estrella in Nice, she might not live in the exact same town, but possibly. Or if we even found Manuel's Spanish birth records, like the Spanish side of that could maybe give us some extra information related to the family as it pulls itself out. So anyways, just very interesting. And this is kind of where we are looking at how can we build information for Estrella. That's obviously the end goal, is to see, well, two things. When was she actually born? What is the actual birth date? And who are her actual parents? We know who her grandparents are, but we do not have confirmation on exactly who her parents are. If I could see a ship manifest of her coming over, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things I will throw out there in case other people do start jumping into search, I will throw this out there. If you do a search under Estrella Suarez, you will find a woman that will appear at first glance to be my Estrella. And she actually has a Social Security death index. She was born in Spain. And I'm trying to think, it will list on here, so you'll know that's the wrong one. It will list the mother's name as Dolores Zapata and the father's name as Jose Suarez. I originally thought this was her. I actually wrote to Social Security and got the original handwritten application that particular person, filled out when they got the application. And I believed that was Estrella's information. This was back a ways before we had found as much as we have now. It said that she received her Social Security in the late 1940s in New Jersey. And in fact, I shared this with the family because I was certain that this was the right person. Everything just seemed to line up. And this is how it works sometimes. Things fit. And then it's like, can I disprove it? It's not just about proving it. Can I disprove it? I shared it with family. And actually, Nina's family, Phil, got really upset because he thought that his mother had lied to him. And that because if she got it in New Jersey, Estrella, then she must have had contact with Nina, and because Nina was in New Jersey. And how could this be? But here's how it finally came unwrapped. I was continuing to research that particular person, that woman who had that information. And I was tracing it back. It was probably a year after I originally found this. I believe for a long time this was her. And all of a sudden, I found a ship manifest, or actually it was a flight manifest, that this particular Estrella was going from New York back to Spain. Because it lists on all this manifest, who's your mother's name? And it said Dolores Zapata, who's the father's name's Jose Suarez. So I knew it was the same one on my record. And they were going from here to Spain. And I was like, here we go. But then I looked, and the years that happened, the year of that flight, or it wasn't a flight, it was a ship. The year that ship happened was the year between when Florence was born and when my grandma was born. She was documented in Illinois. She wasn't on a ship somewhere to Spain. So then at that point, I disproved it. I said, okay. So anyways, if you go in Social Security Index, you're going to see an Estrella Suarez and you're going to think, oh, this is it. I promise you it's not. I've already excluded that one out.
It's not. Right.
She did have a Social Security death index entry under the name Wilma, not under the name Estrella. If I could find any kind of manifest showing when she came over here, that's one of my big goals, to be able to find that.
Yeah. And Manuel's father's name is Jose Suarez. So that did seem very possible.
Right. Except that Jose is a very common name in Spanish. So
it is. Some of the context Nina was able to share with us about the family in Spain, some who came to the U.S., some who didn't. She talks about Fred Alfredo, who's the eldest son of Jose Suarez. She also mentions Fred's son, Oscar, which sounds like this might be the same Oscar that's being talked about in this letter. Oscar and Fred Alfredo were in the U.S. together. We know Nina talks about them visiting the family and letting them know that they were going back to Spain. Fred's wife was in Spain. I don't know about Oscar's wife. I don't know if he met her in the U.S. and took her back or if she was in Spain. But she talks about them going, and then she says Fred passed away there in Spain. And then she says Oscar and his wife died in Spain. Then she also mentioned that Alfredo, Fred, had a daughter. The name was hard to understand. I think she said America, but I couldn't fully understand. And she said that Fred's daughter had no arms. So that could also be a link between what Nina had to say and this as well. And
letter.
like you said, we talk
Mhm.
about with family lore and, you know, like the child with issues with the arms or whatever, who knows whether it's Oscar's child, whether it's Fred's child, whether it's no arms, whether it's an issue with, it could be either one. But just those are some names. If anybody goes looking, you know, those are some names to sort of ground things. So what we're looking for, we are looking for record of Estrella in Spain, her birthplace, her family, the church where she was baptized, a baptism record, a record of Estrella coming to the U.S. from Spain. So those things in particular. So what are some of the things, you said it a little bit, but say it again. What are some of the things we want help with specifically? Like if somebody's like, oh, I want to dive into this, what can they help with?
Well, if anybody had access to the international record, Ancestry has different levels. So if you have access to the whole world records to see if there would be anything related to Estrella in there. I have looked previously, but I have not looked recently. If anybody has access to any of like Spanish church records in Spain, the same thing. Be able to see those things. Those are some of the big things that we're looking for.
Yeah. And then maybe somebody's done research and they know questions that we're not asking that we should be asking, things we're not even thinking to look for that maybe they're aware of. So if you're thinking, wow, you should really be asking this question or you should really be chasing down this information, we would love to hear that as well. Whatever's going to take us toward the goal of finding some of this information. So just to wrap it up, some of the facts, Estrella Suarez, we believe she was born sometime between 1905 and 1907. She's born, we believe, in Asturias, Spain. We think she arrived in the U.S. around 1913, and Manuel Suarez is her uncle. That's what we have to offer in terms of facts.
Yeah, there is a lot of information. I'm trying to look while we're talking here to remember which brother it is. But there's one brother that settled, because, they settled in different places. One settled in Detroit and one settled in Ohio. Obviously, Manuel was down near the St. Louis area. But the one that settled in Ohio, what's interesting about that is in the information that Susan has, there's talk about this relative in Ohio, just knowing that there's a brother that's there.
Yeah.
But you remember also the Suarez that lived across the street from them in Taylor Springs and then eventually moved to Springfield. They were saying they knew their father, who the patriarch was, but that they had no information that they could document related to anything. And they didn't know parents' names or anything. And that was one of the things he's been looking for, trying to build out where do we fit into the bigger family picture. But interestingly, he talked about that he knew that his dad always said that there was a brother that lived in Ohio. That's one of the reasons why I strongly believe that if we ever do get a DNA test from that particular line, that it could very well show. If they're both saying they have a brother in Ohio, it could very well be the link that pulls those together. And just if you remember that story, just for listeners who may not remember, that particular family has a very small pool that's eligible to test for DNA because a couple different siblings that didn't have children, and then one adopted a child. The adopted child is one doing most of the research. There really only is one person who's able to test, and he's an older gentleman who doesn't really see the value in it and has not been interested. They've asked a couple times. The last time I talked to him, the younger one that's in the research, he was saying that he really wanted to be able to find out. This was the last chance that, if he passed away, that they would never know. And he was just going to call his wife, the older man's wife, and see if he could find any way to convince him to take this DNA test before it was too late. That's kind of where we are, thinking that could open things up and establish. Is it a sibling of Manuel's, which I strongly suspect that it could be? Could this also be the parents of Estrella? If it's a sibling of Manuel, it's a possibility that it could be the parents of Estrella.
It is. Well, that's it. That's our hanging thread. That's one thing that we're researching, we're chasing down. If you have new ideas or suggestions or information that might help us, send us a message. We're Buried Threads on Facebook, Instagram, Substack. You can send us an email, buried.threads26@gmail.com, but all links are in our bio. You can find it there. Look, we can't wait to hear from you, and we'll update you on any progress we make from here on out.
Keep pulling that thread.
Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA, silence, or a name you can't quite place, you're not alone.
If you want to go deeper on this story, you can find us on Substack at buriedthreads.substack.com. That's where we release every episode, along with documents, photos, and the kind of details that don't always make it into the audio.
You can also find and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you haven't yet, subscribing or leaving a review makes a real difference in helping other people find us.
For more photos, recap videos, polls, and the occasionally chaotic behind-the-scenes moments, find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at Buried Threads.
And if something we've shared has stirred something in your own family story, we really do want to hear it. Reach out. You might be surprised where a single thread leads.
Until next time, keep pulling the thread.
Just knowing she existed, she was real, she had a name.